Does meat cause depression? Well, that's what we're going to find out. I'm sure by now you've seen this article that says researchers find that eating a certain protein is related to developing depression. A new study shows that elevated plasma levels of the amino acid proline cause a more severe state of depression. Okay, well, those are kind of two different things. Does this proline cause depression, or is it really lead to a worse form of depression? Okay, so bad headlines and bylines aside, what's the real story here? What is causing these elevated blood plasma levels of the amino acid proline? So first off, get down to here under proline levels depend on the microbiome. And it says right here, not everyone who had a high intake of proline was more depressed. Now, wait a minute. I thought this article just said that proline was either the cause of developing depression or a worse form of depression. When studying the depressed people's intestinal microbiome, their gut bacteria, a relationship was also observed between depression and bacteria, as well as between depression and bacterial genes that were associated with the proline metabolism. Now this is getting interesting. Okay, now that to me sounds like the bacteria is responsible for disturbing proline metabolism, and that this disturbance in proline metabolism is leading to the abnormally high levels of proline that are being found in the blood plasma. If this sort of connection between bacteria and the gut and the potential for depression sounds familiar, it is. This is basically the theory of the gut-brain axis, and this is actually what the scientists were planning on studying. Now, some scientists believe that the environment in our gut can lead to an imbalance of harmful bacteria, and that these harmful bacteria contribute to all sorts of negative health, including mental health. Guess what? Carnivores believe that too. That's our personal experience for most of us. This is why we avoid processed foods, refined carbohydrates, and anti-nutrients in our diet. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing then. How did these scientists confirm that it was actually the bacteria that was responsible for the problems with the proline metabolism and worsening depression? To find out if the presence of proline was a cause or a consequence, participants' microbiome, their gut bacteria, was transplanted into mice. The rodents that came from the more depressed subjects ended up becoming depressed. So then we have to ask ourselves, is there a particular bacteria that is responsible? Another confirmatory experiment was carried out using fruit flies in which a more depressive mood can be induced. Now, the researchers isolated two types of bacteria from the gut bacteria, and they added them to the sterilized feed of the flies. Flies that ingested lactobacillus, which was not shown to be associated with depression in mice, didn't have depression. On the other hand, those that ingested Enterobacter, which is associated with depression in humans, turned out to be more depressed. So it sounds like the scientists specifically identified at least one bacteria, which was Enterobacter. And this bacteria is already strongly linked with depression in humans. It seems like it's really demonstrating that the mechanism for how Enterobacter is causing depression in humans. You have this bacteria. When people get too much of it, they get depressed. Well, why is that? Okay, well, what these people did was narrow in on a specific amino acid, and your ability to metabolize that amino acid is somehow impaired when you have too much of this Enterobacter. As a result, you have elevated blood plasma levels of proline, abnormally high blood plasma levels of proline. And that is getting into the brain, and that seems to be maybe leading to a more severe form of depression as a result. All right, so that really begs the question then, how do we end up with too much of this bacteria? How do we get too much Enterobacter in our guts leading to depression? So in this study, they showed that diets that were rich in whole foods will increase the pH in the colon. That means it makes it more alkaline. And that as a result, this can reduce the amounts of Enterobacter in one individual in particular from 35% of their gut bacteria down to undetectable levels. That's a huge change. So, to lay it out for you, a change in diet led to a change in pH in the colon. This change in pH led to less Enterobacter. And this reduction in Enterobacter, in this case, led to the patient in question losing 51 kilograms. So it seems that Enterobacter is not only linked to depression in humans, it's also linked to obesity, which was the purpose of this particular study. If you have a diet that's highly acidic and that produces a high amount of acidity in your body, then your body eventually needs to adapt to that. It has to find a way to buffer that, right? And so what it is doing is trying to buffer that pH in your body by somehow limiting it to the colon. And that is specifically due to your choice of foods, your selection of foods. The consequences of low pH in the gut specifically is growth and proliferation of bacteria, also viruses, fungi, and parasites, and even cancer cells. So very interesting that all of that seems to be associated with your choices of foods, and those choices of foods that can specifically contribute to a low pH, highly acidic colon. All right, so then we got to ask ourselves, so what foods, again, are going to actually contribute this? Common foods in the American diet that lower pH levels include donuts, cookies, candy, highly preserved sauces and condiments, anything baked with white flour, foods high in trans fats, and anything containing high fructose corn syrup or artificial sweeteners. Right, considering that for a large portion of the population that does struggle with obesity, this is the majority of their diet, is this the problem? Because we know these foods can lower pH. Now, what's interesting is this article also mentions that high amounts of meat and cheese and white rice can also be acidifying. The only thing I have to say in rebuttal to that is that, again, this is not going to be the majority of most of those people's food. In fact, when people switch to a diet where the majority of their food, the majority of their nutrition is derived from meat, then it seems like, well, at least anecdotally amongst the carnivore community, that most of them have less depression. All right. Also thought it was interesting that there's a whole lot of beverages that can lower pH. And specifically, the things that were mentioned were coffee, black tea, soda, energy and sports drinks, wine, beer, juices from concentrate. Now, that's not freshly squeezed juices. It was specifically juices from concentrate, and pasteurized milk. When you put all these things together, what does that sound like to you? To me, that sounds like the standard American diet. So it sounds like what we've just found out is that the standard American diet can change the pH of the colon, and that this can contribute to an excessive amount of Enterobacter, which as a result is linked to obesity and depression. Well, imagine that. Now, I do want to point out the actual study. The study itself is not a bad study. The microbiota gut-brain axis has emerged as a novel target in depression, which is a disorder with low treatment efficacy. So what they wanted to do was focus on this microbiota gut-brain axis, looking for a novel way to treat depression because it's historically not a well-controlled disease, right? It's something that the medical industry struggles to treat. So we look at the study highlights. It says that high dietary and plasma proline, all right, were found to be significantly associated with depression severity. Okay, so not with the initiation of depression, but the severity of the depression. It also specifically identifies that circulating proline is dependent on the gut microbiome. And even that after bacterial transplant, the depression was able to be duplicated in mice. So as a result, what they're really getting at here is the root cause is the gut microbiome. So in the end, what does this study really tell us? Well, what the study really tells us is, again, that if you have a particular diet that produces low pH in your colon, a very acidic colon, then that diet, as a consequence, can lead to an overabundance of Enterobacter as a result of that microbe, its functions, and the metabolites it produces. It was seen in this study that it interferes with the metabolism of proline. As a result, proline levels in the blood built up to abnormally high levels, and that is what seemed to trigger or become, when that hits the brain, there was something going on that, of course, they still don't understand, but something is happening where this excessive level of proline was triggering a more severe form of depression. So it's the proline, right? Yes and no. Proline is the trigger, but the actual cause, the root cause, is the diet of the individual and this particular bacteria. All right, so I hope that explains, and I hope this video has helped you to understand what this study is actually saying, and that the study's not bad, but certainly I can say that the coverage of the study has been terrible. So I hope you liked today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give me a like and subscribe so I can bring more of this content where I basically dive into these types of subjects and get to the real root cause of what's being said and what's being communicated, instead of just giving the terrible headline and terrible analysis that we see from the mainstream. All right, but tell me, what do you think, right? What is the actual issue here? Do you think I missed something? Do you think I got something wrong? Comment down below. And again, have a great day. So if you enjoyed today's information, I provide information just like this to my clients to help improve energy, burn fat, and build muscle through an ancestral lifestyle and diet. My program doesn't involve gimmicks like bars and shakes, counting points, tracking macros, or even spending hours and hours doing cardio in the gym. Now, I've not only used this program to help clients improve well-being and health, but I also used it as a part of my own personal transformation. So if you're looking for an easy, intuitive way of eating and simple lifestyle adjustments to improve your well-being, and click on the link in the description below to book your free no obligation discovery call today.